Dear class, welcome to the Epistemology Prezi. This week we will be looking at a series of issues through the eyes of the 17th century philosopher René Descartes, and later the contemporary philosopher Daniel Dennett. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It asks and tries to answer questions like, what does it mean to say you even know something? Is this knowledge that we have different from opinion? And if so, how? What is the relationship between the world around us and knowledge? This includes how we even gain knowledge from the world around us. And epistemology even wonders if there might be things that the human mind cannot even know. Today you get to join a philosophical rite of passage. Millions of undergraduate students have learned about, read, and written about Descartes just like you. I sat through my first lecture on Descartes, read Descartes, and wrote my first critical essay about Descartes, and you are about to do the same. Descartes is another one of those philosophers that has become so much a part of our worldview that he is simply just part of Western values and descriptions of the world. Most of us think there is a real difference between our mind and our body. Our mind, our consciousness, is nebulous, mysterious, difficult to describe. But our body is really just a machine. It might be a complicated machine, but it is still just a machine. This idea that there is a difference between mind and body is called dualism, and it has real effects on the world. Bodily injuries receive immediate care. We simply fix the parts. But injuries of the mind, like depression, dementia, or PTSD, were largely ignored until very recently. And even today, an injury of the mind or a fault in the mind is rarely treated in the same way as an injury or fault of the body. This type of thinking is a real outcome of a long-standing differentiation between the mind and body. So let's look at one place where this idea of dualism came from. René Descartes was writing in the 17th century. His most famous book was called The Meditations, and it was published in 1641. It's pretty old now. So let me set the scene for you. In the beginning of this text, he sits down with plenty of free time in a comfortably warm cottage to simply meditate on knowledge. He wonders just how many of the things he believes are true are really just things that he receives second-hand from family, friends, religion, or his education. As he writes in this passage that I've quoted here for you, how many false opinions does he actually take for true? Now, he doesn't mean this as just a rhetorical question. He wants you to do it too. He wants you to think about this same problem. So, think about yourself. Put yourself in the exact same position as Descartes. Where did your ideas about politics come from? Did you work out all of them yourself? What about facts? What about truth? How sure are you that you're correct? Did you work through each step yourself? Or are you trusting the sometimes faulty minds of other people? What do you think about religion and God? Are those your own ideas? Or are they by some strange coincidence the exact same ideas as your family, friends, and church? How certain are you that the things you believe about politics, religion, and other daily facts, and everything else are reliable? This is what Descartes was doing, and this is what he's asking you to do. This is called radical doubt, for obvious reasons. Now, some of us, if we were a little more scientifically minded, might try to escape. We might try to fall back on the senses. Maybe other people can't be trusted. Maybe we cannot work through every little thing we know, at least not all the time. But surely we can trust our senses. Surely what we see, smell, taste, hear, and touch must be reliable. But, of course, we all know this isn't true. Like Descartes, we all know that you cannot be certain about anything that comes in through the senses. And isn't that just about everything? Like Descartes, we cannot have confidence when we have once been deceived. If you look at the pictures there, that little gray square in the shadow of the green cylinder definitely looks like it is light gray, but it's not. The shadow tricks our brain. It is really the same exact dark gray as the squares that look dark. Now, this is just one example, but there are many examples like it, and the end result is that our senses are just unreliable. If we cannot rely on other people, and if we cannot rely on our own senses, where do we find reliable knowledge? Now, in Descartes' day, and for some people in our day, they would fall back on God. If you cannot trust another person, if you cannot trust your senses, then at least you can trust that God is good and would not deceive us. But, Descartes asks, could this also be a trick? Might there not be an evil, malignant demon that tricks you all the time, whether you are awake or dreaming? Is there really no safe space? If this was the case, everything that you think you know could simply be a trick. There'd be no way to know anything with certainty. So Descartes has painted himself into a very uncomfortable corner. And if you really take the time and follow him along this path, you would be painted into the same exact corner. He's pretty careful. He's thought of nearly everything. He knows what he's doing here. But it is this next step that makes Descartes so famous. Now, there are other things that he says that we won't discuss here, but that you will encounter when you read Descartes yourself. But this next step takes Descartes from a place where he cannot be certain about anything to a place where he has a little sliver, a little traction, a little space to begin to rebuild certainty. Most famously at this moment, Descartes is quoted as saying, "I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum," in the Latin. However, that little phrase, "I think, therefore I am," does not really turn up in the Meditations. That's in another reading. But the same general idea does appear in this quote from the Meditations. Here he says, no matter whether you are deceived by a malignant demon, whether you cannot trust your senses at all, or whether no other person's word can even be trusted, you're still a thinking thing. It may just be opinion that you've received from family, friends, and church, but you are thinking about those opinions. You may not be able to trust your senses very much, but when you think about the illusion, you are thinking about the illusion. And even if an evil demon is messing with you all the time, you're still thinking while being messed with. So when you get right down to it, you are a thinking thing, and nothing can take that away. This is the idea that makes Descartes one of the most famous philosophers. Cogito ergo sum. Now that you have the very basics of Descartes, let's come forward in time for another example of epistemology. It is part of philosophy to keep working on the difficult problems that just won't seem to go away. When we discussed metaphysics, I talked about some of the issues surrounding consciousness. I explained some of the difficulties of pointing to a location for consciousness, the difficulties of describing consciousness, and the difficulties of making neuroscience and psychology match up with our individual feelings about consciousness. Now, one of the most prominent contemporary philosophers of epistemology is Daniel Dennett. He is most famous for writing about consciousness, free will, and evolution. And we are going to pick one idea of his to briefly examine. As you will see, this idea is still linked to some of the problems Descartes raised way back in 1641 when he wrote the Meditations. Here we have a picture of Dan Dennett, and the odd word you see at the top of the slide is qualia. This is a word Dennett created to speak about our so-called subjective feelings and ideas that come in through the senses. You can see his own definition right there. This comes from an essay called Quining Qualia. I think it was 1988. Now, qualia equates with the way things seem to us. Here are some examples. Imagine brushing your teeth and then, immediately afterwards, drinking some orange juice. That weird, unusual, and shockingly bad taste is qualia, as described by Dennett. Likewise, the feeling of the wind blowing strongly against your face, qualia. The smell of freshly baked bread, qualia. Hopefully, you're getting the idea. Qualia are the sensory impressions buried within your subjective consciousness. Now, Dennett created this odd-sounding word to try to make a point. He has a philosophical tool he likes to call an intuition pump. An intuition pump is a short story or short example meant to show how we tend to add extra stuff, extra feelings, extra ideas, and extra value to certain experiences we have. As you can see from this quote below, Dennett is very suspicious of these qualia, and he is especially suspicious of the value statements we attach to them. So, here is his intuition pump. Imagine pouring a glass of red wine, or a cup of aromatic coffee, or any other beverage you prefer. Imagine the taste. Imagine the feel of it in your mouth. That is the qualia. So, here's the pump. What if some scientists created a machine that analyzed every single aspect of that wine or coffee? What if the machine was so advanced that it could smell, it could taste, and it could even describe the feel of the drink in your mouth? It could differentiate between too hot and just right. It could differentiate between overly warm and just right. In other words, it is just as good, if not better, than your own human taste. Here's the pump. Now ask yourself, is your taste somehow different than the machine's taste? Is your taste better? Does your taste possess a quality that no other machine could ever describe? This is what Dennett is trying to get at with his intuition pump. Is our consciousness simply reducible, like the wine, to its constituent parts? Can we simply describe them scientifically? Or is it that there is some special quality added on top of our perceptions and on top of our consciousness? A qualia. For Dennett, one of the problems of epistemology, especially as it interacts with consciousness, is that we humans want to assign a special value to humanness. We want to assign an extra value over and above the atoms, the cells, the molecules, and their interactions. Dennett is trying to push against this idea. He's asking, much like Descartes did, how do you justify that extra bit of knowledge? He's asking, are you certain your individual tastes are different? Or do you just want them to be different? This is one of the underlying issues that philosophy is trying to address in contemporary epistemology. We are creating more and more intelligent machines. Now, as far as we know, none of these machines are conscious, at least not like humans. But what makes our experience of wine or coffee any different than the experience of an artificial intelligence specifically designed to taste wine or coffee? It is these types of issues that remain hundreds of years after the radical doubt of Descartes. Remember, the little sliver that he built his entire theory of knowledge on was that he was a thinking thing. He thought, therefore he existed. The rest, the opinions of others, the senses, were questionable at best. But why can't a machine also be a thinking thing? These are the types of issues being addressed by some contemporary epistemologists. So you should take these three things away with you today. The first is a general definition of epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. It tries to look at the breadth of knowledge, and it tries to look at how we justify knowledge, and the relationship between knowledge and the outside world. It sometimes looks at and asks whether there is even a boundary between the inside and outside world when it comes to knowledge. Epistemology has also become an important part of our everyday worldview. Earlier I gave the example of Descartes' dualism between the mind and the body. Just think about how differently mental injuries and mental problems are treated than physical injuries or physical problems. That's dualism. And though there has been some progress, there is still a massive difference between the judgments and treatments of the mind and the body. Descartes' dualism is still with us every day. This has real effects on the world. These effects are very rarely based on science. They are based on something else. Science would tell you that the mind and body are not different. So why do we treat them differently? These are the types of effects philosophical ideas have on the world. They are difficult to see. They are hidden under our everyday language, and they are very difficult to overcome. So, take these three things, including this effect, with you today when you think about epistemology.